Everybody, welcome. Hi. Hello out there. Welcome everyone. I'm so glad to have you here again for another update for the Short Story Challenge 2024. I can see we already have some comments about your progress. So let's kind of get a look. The story hasn't fleshed out well and you're dissatisfied with it. Well, you still got some time and keep working on it, sometimes this might be an opportunity to actually step away and start over. I know you're like, okay, I don't have enough time to do that, but you never know. You could rally. Sometimes it can go quick when you let something go and start something new. On the other hand, maybe try to break it. Ask yourself some big questions about it. um kind of ask yourself maybe why you're so dissatisfied with it. Don't just let that inner critic silence you. Be like, okay, inner critic, why do you hate it so much? What's bothering you about it? And if it can't really answer, then maybe it's not that bad. But on the other hand, maybe you'll get some truth concerns about it, and then you can go a little bit further. Researching different makes of cars right now. Certainly, Tim can help you with that from the community. Working through story and editing, still a bunch to go. Well, you still got some time, not a ton of time. A week from today is when submissions open. I know May is going by so fast, so just be careful with that. Had to change ideas. You're pretty happy with the new one. That's great. Uh, I recommend just about always to try a bunch of ideas. Don't settle on your first one. Often it takes a bit to keep going. 4,500 words, but only halfway through, so you have to do some paring down. Not necessarily a problem. One of the best ways to end up with a really punchy sentence that just hits you on the gut is is really impressive, is to have way more words than you need and just edit down, edit down, edit down, edit down, edit down until you have core. And you would be like, well, couldn't I just write that core in the first place with all that bloat? No, sometimes the bloat is needed because not all of it is bloat, right? It's a block of granite that you're carving down. I use that analogy a lot, but I think it's true. I think for a lot of artists, especially in the writing world, it's true. You start off with a lot and you know, narrow it down, and then you have a strong piece. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. Starting with 9,000 words and having to hack down to 5,000, you might end up in kind of that Wikipedia synopsis level, or you might have to simplify, but maybe not. Maybe you'll just end up with really punchy writing. It's possible. Schedule this month is absolutely insane, and you were thinking of giving up, but yesterday one of the storylines you were considering began to evolve, and now you believe you have an entry. Isn't that great? Yes. Perseverance, right? It's often just about pushing, 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 not allowing yourself to give up, not allowing life to just steamroll you, right? You can often make it work. Particularly for a project like this, not saying that you don't need to spend a fair amount of time on a short story piece in order to make it work, but theoretically, you would expect there to be a lot less time than a work 10, 12, 14 times as long, right? And so, keep that in mind, one step at a time. Not a quitter, but you don't intend to waste the judge's time. I do appreciate that. And I'm not suggesting that anybody submits something that they're not truly proud of. But on the other hand, again, you have to be careful about that inner critic. The classic story is that Stephen King threw out the first page, not the first page, but a page of writing he was working on that his wife fished out of the garbage. And that became the novel Carrie because he thought it was just a crummy idea. And that was his breakout hit. So you do have to be cautious. Sometimes we are overly harsh on ourselves. So again, though, I'm not recommending you submit something you're not proud of. I'm just saying, you be cautious about that inner critic. That inner critic is not always right. Not always right. 2,300 words, first draft finished. Awesome. 3,100 in. You're saying not as fun as a prompt. Well, it's not as narrow of a prompt, that's for sure, because it's a little bit of a different challenge. We want to give you more flexibility. You might thrive on a more specific prompt. In which case, if you are that kind of artist, I recommend finding some prompts, finding some friends to give you some guidelines. Restrict yourselves. open up the dictionary, point to a random word, and force yourself to use it. Do things like that. It's always an option to challenge yourself and restrict yourself. Task yourself with even some contrivances. I'm going to write it in this way or something like that, just to experiment. Please do that. All right. 2060 words, scoring well with 90. Wow, nice. You will notice when you run your summary scores in AutoCrit for a short story, it will be on the higher side, and that's because, well, there's less data, so there's less deviation from the norm. But yeah, 90 is quite high, so that means I'm expecting it to be quite readable and to follow the best practices. And hopefully the content is there as well. And if it's all there, well, you might be seeing yourself in the final in your trophy. That'd be nice. You revised your draft and feeling pretty good about the story so far, but you think the ending needs to be stronger. Yes, endings are tough. Endings are tough. Endings are a great place to brainstorm and just write different things, especially like the last few paragraphs. It depends on how quick of an ending it is. Often short stories have quite snappy endings. But yeah, ask yourself just all the different possibilities. Like, throw out your expectations. Just look at everything you set up and just really ask yourself: did you make it too easy? Did you make it nuanced enough? Is it one emotion when it could be multiple emotions? Is it happy? Can have a little sadness? Is it sad? Could it have a little happiness? Things like that can make a big difference. Is there a way to create maybe a little bit more questions? Did you solve too much? Did you solve enough? Ask yourself questions about it. Really dig into the details. Don't settle. Don't settle for an ending if you can avoid it, for sure. Struggling with a perfect title? Fair enough, fair enough. Usually when it comes to judging, I wouldn't say titles factor a whole lot. So don't worry about that too much. It creates an expectation, right? But no, I mean, titles can be quite simple. It could be just like a one word. It's like whatever, pawns, and it's like, okay, what is it? Right? And then maybe there's an interesting reason why it's called that. But yeah, I think titles for a short story, it's a little bit different, especially for a contest like that. It's a little bit different than trying to make sure you have the right title to attract people on the Amazon marketplace or something like that. Don't twist yourself into a pretzel is what I'm saying. Not that you shouldn't be proud of it. Sometimes you realize you don't realize how much you need a story until something happens. Dealing with the loss of the family and realizing how imperative it is to work on the story to stay sane. This is the artist's way, right? We escape to our art. We cope with our art. We express our deepest emotions in our art. This is one reason why it can be challenging to share our art and whatnot because of what it represents. But yeah, it's a beautiful gift that artists have, that we are able to do this. And yes, there are a lot of people that you take away their art, and yes, they start to go a little bit loopy because it's a release valve. It's a wonderful part of their life. If you are a creator, creators need to create. It's just in you. And when you stop yourself is when you find yourself really miserable. You just got to keep going. Even when you feel like that's not the case, right? You're like, I don't know if I really want to create. You're almost always going to feel better when you do. I can't say always. You're gonna be like, not always, but almost always. And I'm not a trained psychologist or therapist, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. Uh, you finished your short story or any story for that matter. Wow. And you're playing with the set, figuring out where that is, what? I love that. I mean, really, that is fantastic. Finishing a story, that is huge, right? You wrote that ending, you got somewhere, you have a complete something. Maybe you're still going to carve it out or whatever, but you did it. That's big. Now you can truly say that you are a writer. That is a big deal. Writers write. And I'm not trying to cast any shade, but when I say writers write, I mean they have something that is a entity of some sort, right? Fragments, thoughts. I don't really think of you as a writer. You're like a a potential writer, a working your way towards it, once you have actually written something, even if it's a flash fiction piece, even if it's a whatever, a four stanza poem, if it is a complete something, that's when I really think of you as a writer, for sure. Because there's just something about it. There's something about getting over that hump and being like, I completed something. Even if it's a first draft and it's not the final version, you haven't completely abandoned it. It just makes a difference. It really does make a difference. You need to learn the final editing and autocorrect. Yeah, well, feel free to join us. We have office hours coming up at 2 o'clock for any autocorrect member. You can learn all about the writer's desk. Love to have you there. Catherine also has been doing some really fantastic member events on Saturdays. So check those out. You can always find our events in the calendar, and you can even look at recordings of past events. So please, utilize us, be involved, come to the live events, watch the recordings. We want you to learn all these tools so that they can work for you. That's our goal here at Outcry. All right. So I love all the updates from everybody. Feel free to keep them coming. For those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, well, it's still free to sign up, and you can. You technically will only have a week to work on it. However, maybe you write really fast. I'm not going to rule out anything. People have successfully written brilliant things in a short period of time. So next Tuesday is going to be the beginning of the submission process, and you will have until the end of this month in which to submit. We're going to give you the guidelines in just a second. By just signing up, you will be eligible for prizes, and you will have access to the writer's desk. You will, in fact, be submitting in the writer's desk. If you don't know how to do that, fear not. We will go over all of those wonderful details next week. Rules of the game. Rules, not guidelines. Keep that in mind. This isn't Pirates of the Caribbean. I'm going to use that joke for the third time. We are strict about this, not because we want to be really picky or OCD or something. We just want you to be prepared for the real world. In the real world, rules are rules when it comes to submitting. They are not guidelines. I mean, you may find stories and they're like, they told me to submit in this style and I did this and I still got in. Okay, but you shouldn't look at the exceptions, right? In general, rules are used in order to to trim down the results, to weed out people that aren't paying attention, possibly even affects whether or not they can print you, all different kinds of things. So here are our rules. It needs to be a narrative. We are telling a story. Okay, we are not just giving information. So do not write me a 5,000 words on how to meditate or just data or something like that. And you might be laughing and you're like, who would do that? People have, and I don't want that to be you. Okay, I know some people maybe just do it, whatever. It's like a spam. I get it, but like, don't let that not be you. Experimental writing forms are certainly acceptable. So this doesn't mean you have to write it in the classic prose sense. You could do an entire text message conversation. You could do it as poetry, as rap, as a menu, as long as it's telling a narrative. I don't know how you would make a menu tell narrative, but who knows? Maybe the idea is that if you really read between the lines, you can get a sense of the kind of restaurant it is. I could see something like that happening. I've certainly seen recipes written as a narrative. So fair enough. Yes, 5,000 words in contemplating your novel is not going to be a way of success. Do not listen to Tim. He is trolling you. It's kind of the equivalent of slashing the flat tires of somebody in a race. Come on, Tim. No, I'm just kidding. I love Tim. No more than 5,000 words. Not one more. No. You're like, what? What if I do 5,001? No. Why? I can guarantee you that somebody pained to get to that point. We will get some entries that will have 5,000 words. Never did that. I'm sure you have it. I'm sure you have it. 5,000, 5,000 words. And so that means if they submit an entry and they wrote 5,000 words, guess what that means? That means they probably wrote who knows what, 7,399, and they had to eliminate 2,398. I can do math or whatever in order to get to that point, right? Three. No. No. Do not do that. Don't go over 5,000 words or less. We have to be strict about this. We have to draw the line somewhere. We have to be fair for all the people who are going to painstakingly follow that. Of course, if you want to go a lot less, you can. It needs to be over 1,000. So again, if it's 999, figure out a word you can add. You can do it. I believe in you. No illustrations. No, not because yes, never describe anything. No, no, not that kind of illustration. I mean a graphical illustration. I wouldn't say miscreant. I would mischievous, like to get around in it. Sugar in the gas tank when it happened accidentally. Okay, so it's the sugar in the gas tank to tell people to break the rules. I get it. No illustrations. This is because when we go to print, the ultimate goal of this, by the way, in case you aren't aware, is a trophy anthology. We will be printing up the winners. This isn't going to be published. We're not going to be selling this. It's not going to have an ISBN number. You're still going to own all of it, but it's a trophy anthology to the winners so they can feel that the satisfaction of getting through this process, which is quite an achievement. It's I don't want to call it illustrious. That sounds a little self-serving, but it is an accomplishment because it is going to be difficult. We have a lot of great writers who participate, and we take it very seriously. We do. We really do. But yes, no illustrations. We're not going to be able to print them up on the other side. And no. Somebody's like, so it cannot be a graphic work. No, not a manga or something like that, unfortunately. If you wanted to just give us the text of one and, then that would be something, but no. It cannot be that. And of course, just the text of one wouldn't really be the same thing. The creative guidelines, very simple. Any genre is acceptable. We're going to talk about a lot of genres today. Please don't think of this as an exhaustive list of anything that is acceptable. I'm just going to mention a few and some ideas on how you can tell that genre in short story. But anything is acceptable. And make up a new one. It's fine. Narrative is important. No sexual violence, no rape or things like that. This is we are going to be printing this up. We don't really want to print that kind of thing up, personally. And just for the sake of the judges, so they don't have to read a lot of this content. No sexual activities with minors under the age of 18. I wasn't 100% sure. I had a feeling, though, you were going to say that. Oh, I'm having a little glitch. Yes, I had a feeling you were going to say that. No worries. I have to take people seriously because you just never know. No incest or other extreme sexual content. If you're confused as to what we might mean by extreme sexual content, feel free to ask. Nothing wrong with asking. It's not going to affect your results if you ask us and then you have to edit it or something like that. We probably won't even know you asked the question because we're going to strip names from the entries, and so therefore it's not going to matter. So if you're wondering, it's like, would a work with X be accepted? Ask the question. You can go into the little speech bubble on autocrit.com and ask us. Submit by the end of the month, May 31st, 11:59 p.m. Eastern. Do not wait until the 11th hour, literally, please, because something might happen. It's been known to happen. Computers have been known to not work. Files have been known to disappear. Tim has been known to pour sugar in your gas tank. I'm kidding. But whatever it is, please, please don't wait that late, because if you do, then something bad could happen, right? You could just miss it or something. So don't wait until the 11th hour. Try to submit as early as you can. Submissions do not, in fact, open until next week. And that's to my next point, which is don't submit until you're truly ready. Unfortunately, there's no takes backsies, as it were. If you submit the wrong file, there's not much we can do, because that opens up a whole can of worms of people wanting to edit it at the last minute and things like that. So we just have to accept one and done. And that's what it is. You deny everything. That's the right way to go. But I don't remember that, Your Honor. It does need to tie into the official theme of racing. Right. So what is racing? What do you think racing is, right? We've talked about it a little bit on here. Whenever I have always mentioned it, people start to be like, well, is that all it is? It's not ever all it is. And to be honest, the main reason why we have a theme is because the intention of the contest is that you are writing right now, this May. This isn't some trunk piece you wrote 10, 15, 20 years ago or something like that. The purpose of the challenge is to encourage everybody to write. We just had somebody who wrote for the first time, and that's amazing. And that's why we do this, right? And so if everybody feels like that's what they're doing, and hopefully all of you are, it is the honor system. I'm not going to know, but please listen to us and please do it now. And, theme of racing can help. Theme of racing can help. Okay. So I mentioned this last week, and yesterday we did just kick off our mystery course, our mystery mind course. We do have a whole mystery writing package if you like writing mystery. So it has the cozy mystery workshop, which has taken place. You can find the recording of it. Mystery Mind kicked off last week. Yesterday. Time's not going by that fast. We have 3 weeks left of it, and then it'll be followed up with the plot craft workshop, which goes over the plotting of a mystery, followed by the error proofing your crime scene workshop, where we're going to have a actual trained police investigator who is going to describe the typical mistakes that authors make when describing crime scenes. And you can ask him all those thorny questions that usually would get you on an FBI most wanted list. So, yeah, that's always fun. I'm really looking forward to that one because I'm looking forward to all those questions. It could be really interesting. I have a few of my own. Anyway, you're here to talk about genre. And of course, mystery is one genre. We'll talk about that. But I want to talk about genre expectations when it comes to writing, and specifically when it comes to writing short stories. How do we fulfill some of these genre expectations? Some of them are hard to do in a short form, right? And I want to specify the difference between genre and story type for the purposes of this conversation. I'm going to be talking about genre and not story type. So here's the difference. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is a mystery story type, but it is the fantasy genre. So a mystery story type would be, I need to find out the answer to a very specific question, and I'm on a hunt for it, and that is the ultimate motivation, and that one needs to be solved in the story. Genre is another matter. Genre is the tone, some of the tropes involved. We're going to talk about what is genre. This is where it can get a little bit thorny with certain things like romance, right? There are multiple story types for romance. There's the classic sort of romance story type, which is person meets person or whatever, whatever the relationship is, and then they have some problems and then they work it out and they go off into the sunset. But there's also like the romantic drama story type where it's like, how does this person affect you and so on? And that wouldn't be the genre of romance, even though the story is centered around a romance. Something like Titanic or something like that, right? So we're going to talk today about genre, not necessarily stereotypes. There's other stereotypes too that aren't really a genre necessarily. Some people define them as such. It's art. There's no there's no exact definitions of anything, because you can read Save the Cat and it's going to give you genres, and ultimately they're really stereotypes in my opinion. So I'm just giving you my definitions. Use whatever definitions you want, but just so you understand where I'm going with this conversation. Okay, so genres. Let's talk about them. Fantasy. What are the audience expectations for a fantasy, the genre? Well, wish fulfillment, wonder, unusual elements, right? Not normal, the abnormal, the celebration of something that is a twist from the world or incredibly different than our world, novelty, things like that. How do we get this across in a short story? Well, one nice thing about a short story form is that it allows us to play with the wonder of something fantastical without a lot of explanation. And it's okay because you can just leave the audience with that sense of wonder, drift away, and you're all good because they're not spending that much time in it that they're going to demand the same level of explanation as if you have a longer plot. I often talk about in fantasy, this is something I got from Brandon Sanderson, right? The how much you need to understand the magic is directly related to how much the magic solves problems, right? And in a short story, it's very easy to make something that's a minor problem that doesn't have to be, that doesn't demand that much explanation. So let's imagine you have somebody whose car breaks down by the side of the road. Okay. And they're like, they can't fix it. And then there's some fantastical thing that happens, and then their car works. Do we really have to understand that much about that fantastical thing? Do we have to understand all the rules of its magic and all of that? Or can we just have a sense of wonder and move on? And the character is even contemplating if anything paranormal occurred. Sure, you could do that in a short story. In a 70,000 word novel, I don't know how you would stretch out such a small problem like that, right? And since you generally need a more major problem, well, you often have to explain your magic more sufficiently. Uh, Not always, but you do in order for it to work. So don't even if you want to understand all of the rules to your magic, all the different things, all that world building, keep in mind all you need on the page. This is Daniel's guideline of storytelling. Everybody knows this who follows me. You only need to know as much as what is relevant to the conflict going on that moment. And again, in a short story, the conflict can be more minimal because it doesn't have to sustain your interest for more than just a few minutes. It's not a multiple hour experience. So when it comes to fantasy, you don't have to understand very much about how the magic works in order for it to work out, in my opinion. So the nice thing about it is it does give you a lot of luxury uh, to play around with weird, fantastical things, contrived things that really wouldn't hold up to the same level of scrutiny, but are fun to talk about. This is where fantasy can thrive in the short story form. Because again, the audience expectation is different because you're not sustaining it as long. All right, the same kind of thing can be the same in sci-fi. Sci-fi and fantasy are similar. They're kind of on a spectrum, as it were, where it's like magic on one side, science on the other. And Arthur C. Clarke said, there's not much difference between the two. Fair enough. But sci-fi, the emphasis tends to be more on discovery, enlightenment, asking existential questions, being thoughtful and examining and analyzing, not so much just stepping back and being like, wow. It depends. There are authors that go that way, like Carl Sagan's kind of that sense of wonder about the beauty of the universe. But often it's more of a I want to figure it out. I want to try to understand it and things like that. Now, when it comes to sci-fi, the nice thing about short form is it allows you to ask very strange questions. Not very strange. You ask setups, I guess strange. Yeah, strange situations, difficult to answer ethical dilemmas, and not answer them because it's not that long of a form and you don't have to actually resolve in a short story. I mean, Lady and the Tiger, things like that. There are examples of short stories where no, you don't really have to explore how to you don't have to answer the question for the audience. You're just exploring the question, right? And that could be really helpful. Sci-fi doesn't have to be allegorical, but it tends towards it. Yeah, and sometimes I think it would be to the benefit. So one example of a short form sci-fi story that I think might have benefited from being even a bit shorter and not answering the question, which some of you might be familiar with, was there's an episode of Star Trek Voyager where two characters merge in a teleportation incident and they become one entity. And the ethical dilemma is, does this one entity deserve to exist? Or should they kill it to split it up into the two entities that it started from? That's a very interesting ethical dilemma. And to be honest, you can answer it a bunch of different ways. It's challenging. And the episode does in fact create a solution, so to speak, and that did in fact bother some people because some people didn't agree with the choice that was made. And perhaps a short story could create a situation like this and then not resolve it. The episode that maybe exactly right, it could just leave it to the audience and then it would be a conversation starter. Sci-fi can certainly do this because again, sci-fi is a genre about asking questions and diving deep in human psychology and things like that. All right, what about mystery? So mystery, there's of course an expectation that there is some puzzle to be solved and you're going to get an answer. Do you have to give an answer in short story? In my opinion, the answer is sort of. So the reason why I say sort of is I think you can tell a short story mystery that is successful that gives you enough information that there is an answer if you look for it without answering it. You could kind of think of it like the Encyclopedia Brown method, but without the answer key on the back. I could see that being successful because then it's like, well, no, if you just dig deeper, there actually is an answer in here. There's a way to solve this. Then it's like a puzzle with no solution, and you get there. However, I would say for the most part, unlike the ones I just mentioned, you would find it hard to satisfy an audience if you don't try to solve it or create some sort of answer or things like that. So the question you have with a mystery is, how do you successfully create a mystery with a setup and all of that without bogging it down? How do you do this? Well, I mean, yes, look at something like Encyclopedia Brown and something like that. Often in a short story mystery, what can be the answer to the puzzle is what would be something that would not be satisfying in a full length work. It can be a simple little mistake, one tiny little clue, or something like that that can work out because again the audience is not reading it for so long, and so it can be more of a fun little exercise. However, this also gives you the opportunity to perhaps play around with the form, create a scenario that would maybe be more contrived than you'd want to get away with for a long form book because after hours and hours you're like, that's the answer, whereas a few minutes it's more of a zinger and it's kind of fun, right? uh yeah, this would be a fun way to play with that and see what the audience likes, and then maybe you could even decide, hey, it worked well, it really got people's attention, I'm going to expand it, I'm going to do the same thing again, perhaps, right? Bury your short form story somewhere, like delete it, get rid of it, and then release it again as long form. Perhaps it'd be a fun way to tinker with that. Romance. Romance is interesting in short form because we just don't have a lot of time to explore that much. And romance is about a deep exploration of people. So, how much can you really know about somebody in just a short period of time? It's tough. It's tough to figure to make this work without a lot of unnecessary information dumps or just exposition everywhere. So what I would say is you really want to be cautious about that dramatization. It's always a good idea. Show don't tell, dramatize don't summarize. But specifically when you're talking about a work which is about getting into the depths of the way that people think, what motivates them, the fact that a relationship is the most important thing to be concerned about is the gist of the genre. Just be really cautious about shorthand that is clumsy. Be cautious about the "as you know" sort of statements. Uh, if characters are supposed to be comfortable with one another, show it. Don't be like, "Oh, I always love you, and I always love how you cook this and whatever." No, find a better way. Find a better way of doing that because that's going to be really awkward. It's not going to feel authentic, right? Uh, there are people that just walk into a room and you're like, I can just tell they love each other, right? Because of their mannerisms and the way they are acting. They don't have to say anything. That's the kind of vibe that you want to feel if that's the sort of work you're telling. Now, on the other hand, if you're trying to tell, often romance short stories are not about an established couple facing off against something so much. It can be, but it's often more the kind of will they, won't they sort of moment. It's like they're noticing them and they're kind of making a move or something. Just keep in mind that you want to emphasize the drama of that well. You want to give it a lot of stakes because you don't necessarily have a lot of room to do that. Of course, if you make it something like a proposal, it's very easy. But let's imagine you didn't go for the easiest answer. You went for something more like they're going to finally, ask the person out or something like that. Again, you just want to make sure that it has the proper weight and stakes. And another danger too is testing, testing the relationship. Because again, what you're trying to do is create a miniature romance arc, right? And a romance arc is they get connected, they have some issues and they work it out, right? And there's often multiple steps to that. So if it's all I want to ask them out, it's like the littlest things matter. They start talking and the person looks away and like, I don't know what that means. And you gotta get really into the depth. You're not going to get the breadth in a short story. If you do a breadth in a short story, you're going to come across a little bit like the montage in Up. The montage in Up is really beautiful as a film. It's fantastic. As a written short piece, it would be tricky to do without it starting to feel like a Wikipedia synopsis. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be tricky to do without feeling Wikipedia synopsis. Of course, the montage in Up is not a true romance with a capital R because it ends sadly, and romance isn't allowed to do that. So you would have to stop it before you get to that point. So also keep that in mind. If you want to tell a story about, a beautiful romance and it turns out at the end that the person is dead and they're just recalling them and it's this heart-wrenching piece, feel free to do so. We'll get to that in a minute, though. That's not the romance genre. Thriller. Thriller lends itself well to short stories in a sense because short stories are of a limited word count and thrillers are economic with words. So you can really blitz along. One of the dangers, though, is that you might be tempted to tell too much and it gets to be a Wikipedia synopsis again. You have to get into a depth about a specific moment that's thrilling. Be cautious. Don't make this a I need to recapture my kidnapped child in 5,000 words with multiple locations and set pieces and things like that. And you might be like, "What? Yes, I've seen the submissions. I've been in the trenches, everybody, right?" And I'm just giving everyone advice. What you want to do is you want to pick out a specific moment that is a highly charged emotional moment, but you can get into the depth, making me feel like I'm a part of it, and it can get resolved that quickly. Now, Thriller doesn't have to fully resolve because it's thrilling in a sense. Yeah, it could be a little bit uneasy at the end. Uh, but I would say generally that's I would say it's a pretty risky thing to do versus coming up with some kind of breath of, "Ah, okay, I made it through," kind of thing. It can stop kind of on a dime, but I do think it does need to feel like it stops because if it's just kind of open ended, it's like, somebody's chasing somebody and then they get away. And then they're like chasing them more, and it just cuts. It just feels like it's a scene from a book, right? So you don't want that. You do want to figure out a way to give closure. So be cautious. Okay. Thriller is a chase story. Yes, often. Right. And I would say you probably want to catch up to something. You don't want them to just keep getting away. I'm not saying it's impossible, but yeah. Historical fiction. Historical fiction is challenging to talk about because technically anything I talked about could also be historical fiction, right? You can have historical fiction with sci-fi with time travelers, or fantasy with like steampunk or whatever, or mystery. But when it comes to the audience expectation, why they like historical fiction is that immersion into a world that is not our own. Now, I've already said we only need to know as much about the situation or the world as relates to the direct conflict. So keep that in mind. Even though you're trying to really immerse me in this historical time period, just be very cautious about the level of detail you're including in a short story because it's easy to just want to talk about the past and make it really beautiful sounding. And I'm not saying you can't have any of that, but try to make it serve the conflict. So try to think of a conflict where the historical setting matters. It matters that we're in this historical setting. It's not just somebody is asking somebody out on a date and it could be any time. It just so happens to be set in the 1800s. No, make it matter that it's set in the 1800s. I'm not sure how you would specifically do that in that scenario, but I would do that. One of the reasons why historical fiction can be helpful is its lower technology. So anything that could be easily solved with technology, often you don't have it at your disposal. Fantastical elements come across more fantastical because the technology is lower, which is why a lot of fantasy is written in historical times. Mysteries are harder to solve, etc., etc. You can feel more helpless. Horror, which we'll talk about later, can be more helpless. All the things, all the things. Where do I draw the line on what constitutes historical fiction? I mean, for me personally, you're like, what is historical, right? Was Captain Marvel that was set in the 1990s historical fiction? Um, I the line changes on a regular basis. Often people will say contemporary is like post 1960s and historical is before that. However, what I'm thinking is specifically the time frame informs the piece, and the fact that it is not the time frame it is now is of incredible importance. That's generally what I think of as like a true historical fiction, because otherwise it is just whatever the genre is with a historical background, right? Um, so that's what I would say. But I do think if you talk to like the industry, generally they'll say pre 1960s, post 1960s, but I'm sure that moves all the time. Maybe we're at 1970s by now since the last time I checked. Sure. Yes, a battle nurse during the Civil War could have a romantic encounter, and then the fact that it's in the middle of that setting could, in fact, affect the way that they interact with whoever they're having a romantic encounter in, the kind of obstacles they might face. It might matter beyond just making it more interesting. Now, if you really do want to do it just to make it more interesting, I'm not telling you you can't, because it does in fact make it more interesting, but you just often get more mileage out of it if you do more than that. If you lean into the greater stakes, something as simple as infection was way worse before we had antibiotics. Something like, finding out information was obviously a lot harder before we had access to smartphones or books or things like that, right? So keep that in mind, and utilize the time frame for sure. All right. Memoir. Yes. What if you're writing about yourself, or a true happenstance in a narrative, or a sort of true thing? Again, I'm going to come back to what I've been saying a few times, but just be cautious about the detail you're including and that it's relevant to the conflict you're telling. A very dangerous thing that you can do with a memoir short story is try to write a Wikipedia article about your life and just go, zoop, this is all the things that happened to me. Even if it's thematic, a memoir can often be thematic. It can be, these are all the silly things that happened to me in life. That starts to read more like an article than a short story. It kind of feels like just data. All these weird things happened to me. The weird thing was this, and another weird thing was this, and another weird thing was this, and it starts to feel like an assignment for like a English comp class, and not really like a narrative short story, right? So what I would recommend is, get into the details of something specific, something with a beginning, middle, and end moment of your life. You can give a certain amount of context, as much context as help relates us to the conflict, and put us in the shoes of you in that situation. That seems very straightforward, but I'm just speaking from experience in terms of what often can happen. Uh, the tricky thing too is ask yourself, and this is kind of, don't take this the wrong way, why should the person care about this, right? Because immediately you would say, well, this is an interesting thing that happened to me. That's a start, but often you want to go a little deeper than that. Like, what are you actually getting at? Why are you telling me this, right? It's an interesting that happened, but what does it mean? Like, what kind of impact did it have on you? What kind of impact do you want it to have on me? Like, these are the sort of questions you want to make sure are woven into your recounting. Uh, as a personal example, haven't you had the friend that comes up to you and they're like, I've had the weirdest dream last night, and they tell you all of it, and you're like, yeah, that was pretty weird. And then they just go about their day. Like, what kind of was the purpose? I mean, it was kind of interesting. It might have been an interesting anecdote, but there really wasn't much you had to go on. And that's the same kind of thing, right? The last thing you want is to tell the story and the person is going to have the kind of bland reaction, and your reaction would be, well, you had to be there. No, no, no. You want to put us there, and you want us to understand why you're relaying the story. I shouldn't have to guess. I'd be like, oh, clearly the reason why the person's recounting this part of their life is because it had this kind of impact on them, et cetera, et cetera. Right? Okay, let's move on. Young adult. Young adult is similar to historical fiction in that it's more of a category than a genre. But if you're telling a story about a young protagonist, and the idea is that the intended audience are younger readers, well, you're going to want to keep that involved with some of your choices, right? Often these are about empowerment. They're about making the character, it's putting the character in places that they are, that's beyond what the age would usually get to do. Like Hunger Games is like an extreme example of this, where like a teenager basically changes the world. But that's a little bit of the stereotype. Harry Potter, but I mean, that's kind of the idea. The idea is that this is a wish fulfillment. I wish I could do something to make a big difference in the world. I'm going to see that occur. The danger of it, though, is that you can ham-fistedly sort of just hand it to that character. I understand, in a sense, Harry Potter is basically kind of the chosen one, and Katniss was sort of forced into it. I mean, her sister was, and then she had to volunteer. But you'll notice along the way, the authors did a great job of making them make choices to opt in beyond the initial offer. They were kind of pushed into it, and then they really had to embrace the role. And we get to see that. And so it feels more choicey. It doesn't feel like the story just steamrolled them. That's a danger in young adult, where you just, steamroll it. So, how would you do this in a short form? Well, think of a moment where a character that's younger can make a tremendous amount of impact. And maybe it's a little bit unexpected. They have to rise to the occasion. Look for a little bit of a transformation. Generally, you want your characters to evolve, but young adult is often quite a coming of age thing, right? And so, what you see is their growth. So, at the beginning of the story, they're different than the end. Of course, you only have a limited amount of time. So I wouldn't recommend changing them from completely ignorant to the Sorcerer Supreme, but you want to show some growth. Oh, yes, Katniss is definitely character development, very well developed character. All right, horror. Horror is about unsettling the audience. Short form works great for this because you can really disturb the audience and just leave them in that state, and you don't have to satisfy it, you don't have to resolve anything. In fact, often horror isn't resolved in short story form. It's just disturbing, and it just leaves you with the disturbing image, and you have to be like, ah, and I'm gonna have nightmares tonight, right? Because that's the purpose of it. So then you have to ask yourself, well, why are you doing this? Let's get a little bit deeper. Why are you troubling people? Why are you disturbing people? Are you just trying to gross them out? Nothing wrong with just having a little bit of fun, but often you're getting at something else. You're getting at something deeper. The reason why you're exploring a phobia is maybe because you have it. Maybe you're troubled by it. Maybe uh and do you really want to explore the phobia exactly on the nose, or do you want to dance around it, do a unique take on it? It'd be very easy to be like, I'm scared of spiders, so I'm going to tell a story where somebody falls into a den of spiders. Obviously, that would be very disturbing. But you can also ask yourself, why is it that I'm scared of spiders? What is it about them? The shape, the speed, the fact that they're hidden, the swarming, like, what is it about them? And then you can take some of those characteristics, maybe invent a new creature, maybe have a whole new way of looking at things. Another thing that horror does really well often is it creates scary scenarios out of the mundane. It tells you even the simplest things in life are something to be afraid of and unsettling, and people kind of like that. It's a fun thing to play with, and the short form allows you to do that easier for something that's maybe a bit more contrived, or something that would be silly for 80,000 words. But for a very short period of time, it works well. Obviously, the whole like possessed doll thing has been done tons and tons of times, and it's not like it's not ripe for material, but like I do think the classic Twilight Zone about it is really, really good as a short form, and in many ways more successful than longer form pieces are about it, where you can take it maybe even a bit more seriously, and it's less silly than a lot of the other ones get. It's like truly unnerving. When you don't spend as much time thinking about something, you often can get that deep dive, get really immersed, freaks you out, and you don't really think about all the contrivances about it and things like that. All right. Literary fiction. Literary fiction is a genre that often gets short shrift because it's sort of the buck. It's almost like the like everything that's left genre is often how people describe it. But like, yeah, there's something to be said about I'm not trying to lean into these other tropes so much, right? I'm telling a story about life. I'm telling a story about things as they are, or I'm not. It's hard to define specific genre. I'm going against the expectations, things like that. Yeah. When it comes to literary fiction, one of the dangers is you can make it hard for the audience to figure out what you're getting at, because sometimes literary fiction can be a deconstructionalist sort of attitude. It's like, I'm not going to follow the rules. I'm just going to be beautiful with my words, and I'm going to just talk about life, and you get to draw from it your own conclusions. This can be successful, but it also can be a danger where there's not an identifiable conflict, there's not an identifiable motivation. It sort of feels like a slice of life, even if it's a highly opinionated one, or it can feel a little bit like a rant about something. So you do need to be cautious about that. However, there is something to be said about, using your words to make something beautiful that we wouldn't know about, right? Uh, you could do a literary fiction about the narrative of the life cycle of a plant or something, and you could say, well, that sounds overly arty or whatever. It could be beautiful, and it could be very moving, and it can be very interesting, and it can help you see the delicate nature of things and whatnot. So I bring this up because often, this isn't a genre we talk about as much. We don't have as many literary fiction writers as we do some of the other writers in our community, but it can be a gorgeous genre. And I will say another thing about literary fiction is that because the concept of literary fiction tends to be smaller, less emphasized, right? It doesn't tend to be so high concept, like in a world where that is not generally literary fiction, right? Literary fiction is about kind of more like real life and things as they are. And so you really have to know your stuff in terms of your presentation. It's about the words on the page. It's about the beauty of the language. And from that standpoint, there is an audience expectation that's different. Not that audiences don't expect things to be well written, but literary fiction, that's a lot of what it is. And so, if you're going to go that direction, just be cautious about that. You're going to have to be strategic about your word choice. You're going to have to be the sort of person that can describe a trip to the grocery store and make it interesting, because yeah, that's the world that a lot of people like to live in with the literary fiction. They like to see the world from somebody else's eyes that can recount it so beautifully that they see it in a new way. That's to me when I think literary fiction is at its best. So again, it's kind of a catch-all. It's kind of a catch-all genre in a sense. It's like anything else, but that's what I think. So if you're writing a short story, the nice thing about it is that the scope is so small because it's not that many pages, that the fact that there isn't as much, there doesn't have to be as deep of a conflict in literary fiction. The fact there may not even be as identifiable as one or something like that, you can get away with it a lot easier, in my opinion. Literary fiction, I think it often works better as an art form in short form, particularly because you can get into the craziest amount of depth about something that you would never be able to in 70,000 words. But for 5,000 words or 3,000 words, sure, you can tell a beautiful story about a snowflake or something. Absolutely. I've seen it. And bring the audience to tears. And if it was 70,000 words, that would be almost impossible because it's just not going to sustain their interest. So, utilize that. And of course, other devices like poetry and things like that might fall into this category as well. All right. Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed that look over different genres. Like I said, I uh I do not want to make it sound like these are the only genres. I'm sure there are going to be people that'll be like, "You forgot X." I was just bringing up the most major ones that we're being told about a lot, or we get asked about a lot, and how you can frame it. And of course, I'm also out of time, so I only have so much time to talk about them. But I certainly appreciate all of you joining me this week. Next week is going to be the grand finale where we wrap this all up. We'll be giving away some prizes, we'll be opening up submissions. And I certainly would love for all of you to share what it is that you would like to about what you're working on or things like that. That would be a lot of fun. Or what you learned throughout this process, how it changed you as an artist, and all of that. For those of you who are AutoCrypt members, we of course have club sessions all the time. We have one coming up this evening at 7 o'clock. I'm going to be talking about economy in fantasy and sci-fi. It's an interesting topic. how do you create scarcity of resources? What do you do with that? Tomorrow we have a 6 p.m. horror club. We have accountability on Mondays at 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. Eastern. Monday at 8:30 p.m. We're going to have another mystery club, um, so on and so forth. Oh, I'm sorry. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. is actually going to be a write-in. So if you just want to come in and write with fellow authors, that'll be great. Particularly if you're working on the short story and you want some accountability, so you don't wait until the 11th hour, because of course you're not going to do that, right? Right. So yes, you can come tomorrow, and you can work on that as well. Oh, thank you so much. Yes, like and subscribe if you can. It certainly helps us out. Beat the algorithm, the little bell. Clubs are part of the AutoCrit membership. They are not extra. So if you are an AutoCrit Pro member, you can just join us right in. And if you aren't an AutoCrit Pro member, you can become an AutoCrit Pro member at a great rate if you just go in through your account. We have some special offers right now. You can come become a member for just a few weeks if you want, and see what we're all about and all of that. So yeah, absolutely. So thank you, everybody. You have a wonderful day. Bye.